Hello, I'm Moxon. I'm here with my colleague Dr. Justin Webb. We're both from London Metropolitan University in the UK, and we're going to talk about our Wild Ways study and mixed methods research to understand urban rewilding behaviour in London's private gardens. Urban rewilding is vital for the creation of livable cities, given urban nature's contribution to citizens' well-being and cities' climate change resilience. Nearly 70% of the world's population will live in cities by 2050. Urban nature results in better resident well-being, which increases with its biodiversity. It enhances the appearance, air quality, and climate change resilience of our cities, and provides important habitat for wildlife, contributing to tackling the global biodiversity crisis. For the purposes of this study, rewilding is defined loosely and interpreted for an urban context as incorporating native plants and animals into urban infrastructure. Designers and planners must engage residents in rewilding their gardens by understanding how to influence their behaviour. The Rewild My Street campaign, shown here, aims to do this in London, using vision drawings of a typical residential street adapted for wildlife to inspire residents and organise guidance. The successful integration of urban rewilding into cities is dependent on both sensitive design and residents' acceptance of a wilder form of nature. If this can be achieved, future cities could nurture people while helping address the global biodiversity crisis. The Rewild My Street campaign, shown here, aims to do this in London, using vision drawings of a typical residential street adapted for wildlife to inspire residents and organise guidance. Private gardens, where residents' behaviour significantly impacts their contribution to city-scale green space and biodiversity, represent a key challenge. Gardens cover a quarter of many cities, including the UK capital London, where gardens' habitat value is declining through residents removing greenery, and it suffered a 12% loss of vegetated garden cover over a 10-year period. Rewild My Street inspired the Wild Ways study, a cross-disciplinary project applying behavioural science methodologies to design research, which aims to investigate pro-environmental behaviours in relation to improving the biodiversity of private gardens in London, in the UK. Here, we present new findings from the study's first phase, a scoping review of the existing literature on understanding and influencing rewilding behaviour in urban residential gardens. The cross-disciplinary Wild Ways study is applying behavioural science methodologies to design research to investigate urban rewilding of private gardens in London over 4 phases. Rewild My Street inspired the Wild Ways study, a cross-disciplinary project applying behavioural science methodologies to design research, which aims to investigate pro-environmental behaviours in relation to improving the biodiversity of private gardens in London, in the UK. Here, we present new findings from the study's first phase, a scoping review of the existing literature on understanding and influencing rewilding behaviour in urban residential gardens. We will summarise findings from the first phase, a scoping review of global literature on understanding and influencing rewilding behaviour in urban residential gardens. We will then reveal preliminary findings from the current phase, mixed methods research through interviews and a qualitative survey of London residents to test the findings from the scoping review and identify new themes particular to London.
Many frameworks exist upon which behaviour change interventions can be based. However, it's not clear which is the most comprehensive and conceptually coherent. The behaviour change wheel aims to overcome this problem by synthesising 19 behaviour change frameworks, with a behavioural model sitting at its centre. The behaviour change wheel has the combi model sitting at its centre, the behavioural model. And the combi model postulates that behaviour comes from an interaction between one's capability to perform a behaviour, the opportunity to perform a behaviour, and the motivation to carry out that behaviour. The behaviour change wheel provides an evidence-based, stepped approach to changing behaviours, encouraging intervention designers to consider a full range of options, choosing only those that are the most promising. So let's take a quick look at the combi components. So the physical capability, the strength, skill or stamina to perform a behaviour. The psychological capability, the knowledge, mental strength, mental skill or mental stamina. The physical opportunity, time, location, resources and availability. The social opportunity, cultural norms and social cues. Then there's reflective motivation, so the plans and evaluations, the conscious decisions to perform behaviours. But there's also automatic motivations, our impulses, our automatic decisions, our habits, our inhibitions. When trying to change behaviour, it's important to use these combi components to understand that behaviour, to help understand where we might need to make a change to influence behaviour in a particular way.
Rewild My Street inspired the Wild Ways study, a cross-disciplinary project applying behavioural science methodologies to design research, which aims to investigate pro-environmental behaviours in relation to improving the biodiversity of private gardens in London, in the UK. Here, we present new findings from the study's first phase, a scoping review of the existing literature on understanding and influencing rewilding behaviour in urban residential gardens. So firstly, here are the findings from the first phase, a scoping review of existing literature on urban rewilding behaviour, coded using the combi behaviour model.
So what we found from the included articles and the coding of those articles is that all of the components of behaviour received a mention. So actually this is a behaviour that we could influence in terms of psychological capability or physical capability, social opportunity, physical opportunity, reflective motivation or automatic motivation. And we also identified demographic factors that seem to influence the behaviour that we're trying to change.
We tabulated the coded combi themes from the literature. All combi factors need to be considered to understand urban rewilding behaviour, but opportunity and motivation factors have more influence, particularly reflective motivation, while physical capability has the least. More facilitators of than barriers to urban rewilding were found across all categories except physical capability.
From the included articles that had a look at intervention functions or intervention strategies to change this particular behaviour of urban rewilding, we identified examples of education, training, persuasion, incentivisation, enablement, modelling and restriction.
We tabulated the coded behaviour change wheel themes from the literature. All intervention functions except coercion have a bearing on influencing urban rewilding behaviour. Education was the intervention function most often found in the literature. Persuasion, incentivisation, enablement and modelling were fairly commonly cited. Training and restriction were rarely cited, and coercion was never cited. These findings suggest a need for action across multiple areas to maximise impact, Examples included raising awareness of urban rewilding benefits among the public and schools, engaging more urban residents in citizen science, community gardening, and council-run wildlife gardening programmes.
We also identified the policy categories, the mechanisms to bring the intervention functions to life, of environmental and social planning, communications and marketing, legislation, service provision, regulation, fiscal measures and guidelines. So what does this mean going forward? Well, as a research team, now we have an understanding of the COM-B components, the components of behaviour, the capability, opportunity and motivational factors. We can then work together with Londoners, with other stakeholders, local and regional decision makers to co-create an intervention strategy that reviews the intervention functions identified in our review and considers the policy categories to bring those to life, to design an appropriate intervention strategy to influence one or more of those COM-B components, using the rewildmystreet.org website as the basis for that intervention development. So our next stage is to go into an intervention development process, piece of research, co-creating that intervention with Londoners and key stakeholders, using this review and this understanding of the existing evidence to feed into that process to make sure that the intervention strategy that is developed is evidence-based and stands the best chance of success. So what we found from the included articles and the coding of those articles is that all of the components of behaviour received a mention. So actually this is a behaviour that we could influence in terms of psychological capability or physical capability, social opportunity, physical opportunity, reflective motivation or automatic motivation. And we also identified demographic factors that seem to influence the behaviour that we're trying to change.
In tabulating the policy categories, we found all have a bearing on influencing urban rewilding behaviour. Communication and marketing was the policy category most often identified in the literature. Environmental or social planning and legislation were fairly commonly cited, and service provision, regulation, fiscal measures and guidelines were rarely cited. These findings suggest a need for action by multiple stakeholders to maximise impact. This might include reviewing the target audience and framing of messaging from urban rewilding campaigns, prohibiting chemical use in gardens, and offering grants, tax incentives, or product giveaways to support rewilding. Rewild My Street inspired the Wild Ways study, a cross-disciplinary project applying behavioural science methodologies to design research, which aims to investigate pro-environmental behaviours in relation to improving the biodiversity of private gardens in London, in the UK. Here, we present new findings from the study's first phase, a scoping review of the existing literature on understanding and influencing rewilding behaviour in urban residential gardens. Here are the findings from the current phase, mixed methods research, which currently consists of interviews with London residents.
So the COM-B model was used as a coding framework to analyse the transcribed interviews. So I'll go through each of the COM-B components in turn. So firstly, capability, so physical capability. This component wasn't mentioned much by interview participants, although it is self-evident that there is a requirement to have the physical strength, skills and stamina to be able to perform urban rewilding. One participant did say, I don't feel able. So it shouldn't be assumed, because it wasn't really mentioned, that people have the physical capability to perform urban rewilding activities. One theme did come up, that in terms of heavy lifting, with people saying that they enjoyed the process of seeing the plants grow, but not so much of putting them in and putting the hard work in, and seeing it very much as doing too much. In terms of psychological capability, this was a rather big domain with a number of themes identified. Firstly, there was this thirst for knowledge. People wanting to know more, wanting to learn as they went, learning by experience. People didn't see themselves as experts in any way. And they also wanted to have a source of information that was available to them from somebody that was an expert. Some people used the internet, some people used YouTube over books, but actually having somebody who was knowledgeable to answer a very specific question seemed like the best approach for people to learn rather than having to dig their way through large sources of information. And then the other domain or theme in this combi domain was the bigger picture. People understood climate change. They understood their role as part of this wider process of making changes and how they could tip the balance in one small way by making positive adaptations to their garden. So the bigger picture, people understood it and wanted to do their bit. The physical opportunity to garden for wildlife and biodiversity and take place in urban rewilding also received a mention from our participants, particularly around the space that they had available to them, the amount of space, the size of their garden, the type of garden, the surrounding context, their neighbours' gardens, whether they were sharing spaces, and the presence of particular types of species already. Time was a concern. This also spoke back to the capability and trying to source information. Some had more time than others to take part in these activities, and resources were also a concern or something that could influence urban rewilding. The social opportunity, family played a big influence. People's upbringing had an influence on their taking part in this particular behaviour. Community, teamwork, knowledge, resource sharing, the social benefits and networking, that community cohesion also had an influence on behaviour. And there was an influence at this more macro level from the government and local authority and whether they did or didn't provide support.
In terms of motivation to do urban rewilding activity, reflective motivation was found in the interview responses more often than automatic motivation. However, the quotes suggest that the automatic issues, being emotional, generated a powerful, non-negotiable behavioural stance, so they shouldn't be dismissed, whereas respondents were more open to discussing and reassessing reflective issues. Automatic motivations included strong feelings about nature, about particular species, about environmental issues generally, about having a sensory connection, and about perceived threats. The other theme was habits, be that to do with garden maintenance or pet care that might be entrenched behaviours. In terms of the reflective motivations, these included appreciating the many benefits of urban nature, such as health or social benefits. Thinking about nature directly, so wanting to help species or the environment more generally, avoiding chemical use, enhancing growing of vegetables, or educating children in the household. Creating a haven was important in your own space, either for aesthetic reasons or to kind of screen out noise or visual intrusions. And other priorities were an issue, so thinking about things other than nature, such as providing space for car parking, prioritising child or pet safety, or thinking about admission of sunlight and, for example, avoiding planting densely because of that. Our next steps for Wildways are that we're about to publish Phase 1 journal articles on understanding and influencing findings of the scoping review. We're soon to launch a Phase 2 questionnaire survey to supplement the interviews we've presented here. We will then work on a Phase 3 intervention strategy development with focus groups, before embarking on Phase 4 testing of the interventions on Rewild My Street. The results will have implications for practice and policy aimed at influencing urban rewilding in cities worldwide, They will help designers, policymakers and campaigners employ behavioural science strategies to encourage urban rewilding among residents, providing the urban nature needed to mitigate the ecological crisis and create livable cities.
The study protocol has been published. The title and web address are available to you here on screen. For more information on Rewild My Street, then the web address is rewildmystreet.org, or you can get updates on Twitter at rewildmystreet. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. If you would like more information, then you can contact either Sian or I. Our email addresses are s.moxon@londonmet.ac.uk or j.webb1@londonmet.ac.uk.